Hi, in today's video, we're going to look at the process of selling a home after you've signed the listing paperwork. What happens next? And we're going to start right now. Hi, my name is David Matney with Nebraska Realty. I'm a local realtor here in Omaha, Nebraska. Now, in today's video, we're going to look at the process of selling a home after you've signed the listing paperwork. What happens next? All right, after you sign the listing paperwork, the next step in the process is the home stager is going to come out and stage the property. The stager is going to be there a couple of hours, and the stager is going to make suggestions as to how we should present the property for showings. Now, depending on the situation, and every home is different, after staging, it could take several weeks before the home is ready for photos, or it could be ready for photos the next day. Every home is different, okay? But after the staging is complete, then what happens, and the home is ready for photos, then the photographer is going to set an appointment to take photos of the property. Now keep in mind, we're going into fall, okay? So let's say the stager comes out and there's a lot of stuff you need to do in the inside, and it may not be ready for several weeks, okay? But the outside looks good now. It might be a situation where it might be a good idea to take the photos, the exterior photos now before the snow flies, and then the interior photos when all the inside repairs and updates are completed. So keep that in mind, especially as we go into December and we go into fall. All right, once the exterior and the interior photos are complete, and that'll take a couple days to get those back from the photographer. Maybe not take a couple days. It takes a day or two to get the photography back. Then what will happen, the home will go live on the multiple listing service. And when it goes live on the multiple listing service, that's when it'll be available for showings, for agents to show the property. Now, keep in mind, in terms of showings, you might get very little notice, and in some instances, you'll get a day or two of notice. The situation's going to be, it'll depend, okay? You want to make sure you do not turn down showings if it can be prevented. Now, there might be situations where, yeah, you have to turn down a showings, but sometimes you only get one crack at that buyer, so you want to make sure it's available to everybody who wants to take a look at it. All right, you've shown the home, you've got an offer now, the contract has been negotiated. What happens after the contract has been accepted? Okay, the next thing that's going to happen after the contract is accepted, copies are going to go to the lender and to the title company. The buyer will then, more than likely, will do a home inspection, okay? And they'll give you a couple days notice. But what will happen is the home inspector will show up to the property, let's say at 8 o'clock, and then at 11 there will be a walkthrough, okay? And the inspector is going to be there by himself for a few hours. The buyer shows up at 11:30 to do the walkthrough, and then they're going to go through the property and any deficiencies that they found in the home inspection. Now, it may be a day or two after the inspection is complete before you find out what the buyer decides to do. The buyer has three options. The buyer can decide to take the property as is, the property could ask the seller to make some repairs, or the buyer can say, hey, you know what, there's too much wrong with this property, hey, we want to bail. Okay, so after that home inspection, in a day or two, you'll get the home inspection results. And at that point, you can decide. You have options as well. You can decide to make those repairs, you can decide not to make those repairs, or you can even negotiate what repairs you will make. And it's not unusual for things to go back and forth. And it's also not unusual for the seller to ask for additional time in order to get estimates on those repairs, okay? Okay, after the home inspection is complete, if you're selling the property, you want to make sure you get those repairs done right away. Don't wait till the last minute, because a lot of contractors are very busy. It's always a good idea to have any repairs done done by professional contractors. That way you can have a paid invoice and that you have proof that the work was done. Now's not the time to have Uncle Bob show up and make the repairs himself, because again, there's a liability issue. So it's better to have professional contractors complete those repairs, okay? And then after those repairs are complete, you want to provide those receipts to your agent. That way that agent can make those available to the buyer before closing. When the contract goes to the title company is going to be doing a title search. Now the title company is going to be contacting you for additional information. They're going to ask for your social security number and they're going to ask for your loan information. And they're going to do a title search to make sure what liens have to be cleared before closing. As part of the lending process, one of the things that has to happen is the lender is going to order an appraisal for the property. Okay, now here's the thing with the appraisal. Typically for most homes, depending on the financing and the terms of the contract, but let's say that you sold the home for $200,000. The lender is not going to give money on that property unless it's worth $200,000. Okay, now in our market right now, we have a very hot market. So a lot of times what will happen is you'll have exposure to the market. You might have 4 or 5 offers. You might have started at $200,000, but now you're up to $220,000. Okay, now that appraisal has to be worth, if it's like, for example, if it's FHA financing says it has to be worth $220,000. Okay, so what do you do in that situation? Okay, one of the things you can do is on that appraisal is make a list of all the updates and how much those updates have cost you and put that out so the appraiser can see it. You can also put together like a little packet for that appraiser to say, hey, these are other homes that have sold in the area and here's what they sold for, in order to kind of support that sales price. But that's what you can do for that appraisal. And in some situations, it may be better to take the lower offer at more solid terms rather than a higher offer at FHA. The situation is going to be dependent, and your agent will help you walk you through as to what offer may be the best choice in terms of which offer to take. All right, the next thing that's going to happen as part of the loan process and the way our contracts are written is they're going to do a termite inspection. Now the property has to be free and clear of wood destroying insects in order to close. So that's going to be part of the process. Okay, after the termite inspection, after the appraisal, the title company is going to order a loan payoff, and then the buyer is going to schedule the buyer walkthrough and the closing. Okay, now for closing, the seller does not have to show up to closing in our state. What'll happen is about a week before closing, what'll happen is the title company will contact you and they'll have you come into the title company and sign what they call the deed set. Okay, and that is actually your portion of the closing. And then a week later, the buyer shows up with their money and the buyer is going to sign their set of paperwork. That way you don't have to show up to closing. And then after closing, then the buyer is going to get the key to the property and the buyer gets to occupy the property and the seller will get their check. Now, about a day or two before closing, what's going to happen is the buyer is going to do a walkthrough. Okay, and they're going to make sure during this walkthrough that all the terms of the contract have been met. So that means if the buyer asked for the stove to be included and the refrigerator included, that the refrigerator is there and the stove is there. And any repairs that are done, the buyer can walk through and make sure that those repairs have been completed. Okay, now the seller ideally would be out of the property at the time of the walkthrough. But in some situations, that's not the case. Some situation, the seller may be right up to day of closing, still moving out. But however, as at closing, let's say it closes at Friday at 11 o'clock in the morning. At 12 o'clock, that buyer will get that key, that closing is going to take about an hour, and the buyer is going to show up to that house with all their belongings and want to move in. So the seller at that time has to be out of the property. Okay, you want to make sure before you move out that the home is clean and the yard is mowed and things like that. Okay, just it's just common courtesy. But again, don't leave things, junk behind, because if they go through that walkthrough and junk is left behind, then that may delay closing, and you don't want that to happen. All right, that kind of concludes the home buying process after the contract, after the listing paperwork has been signed. Now, if you have any questions or anything like that, now be sure to look at this video here, because we talk about I don't know what we're going to talk about, but we're going to talk about something probably pretty interesting.